We have a court case for today on this Saturday. We have to pass judgment on whether or not Destruction Warlock is found guilty of being the best DPS spec in Mythic Plus. Now, this might come as a surprise to many who haven't kept track of what's been going down at the beginning of Season 4, especially because if we had to go and take a look at the entirety of the expansion, it's not that Destruction has been having a pretty nice time. If we had to name one of the Warlock specs for having been meta or powerful at any point in this expansion, we would have probably said Demonology. Yet, at the start of this season, we have been seeing something going down in Mythic Plus, which has been Destruction quickly rising in the amount of popularity that they have in Mythic Plus. At the moment, it still seems quite low. You think like, well, they are kind of matching Fire and Red and still super far behind Shadow, but that's not all that matters. You can already start seeing in their performance, where they are already doing top damage right now in this second week of Mythic Plus. In week 1, they were ramping up, they were getting higher. You could still see that their top damage was still competitive in week 1, and now in week 2 they are straight up matching Shadow Priest. They are, unlike many of the specs at the top, one of the specs who is changing their tier set. So now in week 2, with the second charge of the Catalyst, many players, I'm assuming, have been able to complete their 4-piece set bonus, which is relevant for Destro because they are changing their tier set. They are not keeping the Season 3 version of their tier set, they are going back to their Season 1 version. And this is very relevant because their Season 3's tier set was quite terrible. It might have been slightly better for single target damage overall, but in the context of Mythic Plus, and the one thing that is making them very good in Mythic Plus, which is the Gigapools, then that tier set was awful compared to this Season 1 tier set, which, as boring as it is, as passive as it is, it's just flat out more damage and more scaling of your secondary stats, in this case crit chance and crit damage. But the question is, what has made Destro powerful though? Okay, fine, they are changing a tier set, but surely a tier set is not just enough to make you immediately meta compared to just a couple of weeks ago. They have not really been buffed in any other way, they have not received any balance tuning. Well, why were players not running Destro nearly as much compared to now? In the case of Destro, pretty much what has been their fortune this season are the dungeons. Because what was Destro's problem in Season 3 and in this dungeon pool, if we exclude the already initial problem of their Season 3's tier set not being nearly as efficient for Mythic Plus and big AoE pools, the problem were also the dungeon themselves. Not nearly as many dungeons as this season could be done with very large pools, which are the strong point of Destruction. Why? Because amongst the reworks of target caps of Blizzard that were put in the game, from 6 target cap to 8 target cap to 20 target cap, all the way to things like the soft cap at 20 or the square root target cap and all these complicated nerdy numbers, the one who ends up suffering the least in terms of AoE damage is Destruction Warlock. Because Destruction's Rain of Fire has a soft cap at 20 targets, but unlike other specs, their spell is way more spammable. You know, a Windwalker's Monk Whirling Dragon Punch also has a soft cap at 20. A Volley of a Hunter has a soft cap at 20, a Starfire of a Balanced Druid has a soft cap at 20, Immolation Aura or Fell Rush have soft caps at 20, but you're not spamming those once per second for 30 seconds straight, like a Rain of Fire can do. And these dungeons in Season 3 were, scientifically speaking, shit. The worst of all were the 2 Dawn dungeons. The Dawn of the Infinite dungeons were very limited in the amount of big pulls you could make. The dungeons were very broken into different phases, into different platforms. Making big pulls was very hard. Even when you had big rooms for big pulls, the mechanics of the mobs themselves limited the amount of big pulls you could make. Like for example in Murzon's Rise, the first platform, even though it looks like a juicy mega pull, turned into a nightmare trying to manage the 3 mini bosses together, plus all of the interrupts required for the Twilight Magus AoE. Even in the other one, in Galakrond's Fall, the big platform in the middle, attempting to do the coalesce times with the debuffs put onto different players blowing up, or dealing with the tank busting magical debuff on the tanks multiple times, made it very hard to deal with. Plus other dungeons weren't that good either. Throne of the Tides wasn't a great dungeon for large pulls. Dark Art Ticket also wasn't a particularly great dungeon for many large pulls. This season though, it's much better. You have 3 of the more notorious large pool dungeons right now. You have Algetar Academy, which is the mega pool dungeon. You have Nokud Offensive, which also has some pretty decently sized pools. And then you also have Bracken Knight Hollow, which also allows for some pretty large pools. Not to mention Ruby Life pools as well. Can have some pretty nicely sized large pools, and even Neltarus. Pretty much all of these ones allow you to have some nice 10 to 15 to 20 plus enemies at the very least being pulled at the same time, playing around your cooldowns, and this works very well for Destruction Warlock. Yes, the spec is brain dead easy, that's not what we are discussing right now. It's just about what they can do when there is a very large pull. You will see that, you know, even in this window, yes, most of their buttons are going to be spamming Rain of Fire. They're going to be setting up the whole thing by using a bunch of immolets as the tank is being busy rounding up the mobs. They will use their weapon effect, trinkets or potions, depending if they are available, and then they just spam a bunch of Rain of Fires. That's gonna be the play for the majority of all of these spikes that you see for Destruction Warlock. And this is very effective because they don't suffer nearly as much from damage reduction limitations on the Rain of Fire. So the more you can pull, the more you can stack together so that your Warlock can stack up all of their buffs. Of course, they run with a Shadow Priest, so they're also getting a power infusion to spam as many Rain of Fires as you can in as little of a time as possible. And this will net up to be some very high DPS, in this case on a single pull, some 700,000 plus DPS. In a small window, it's well over 1.5 million DPS, mostly just with Rain of Fire. That is what is giving the power to Destruction Warlock in this season. Yes, that's the major power. The single target damage of a Destruction Warlock is not very special, even more so when you have to focus your talents even more into AoE. Your single target damage becomes reasonably weak overall. But that is obviously not why you would be brought to a Mythic Plus key. You would be brought because of your very large uncapped AoE damage and the ability of players nowadays to have these very large pools, also helped by the dungeon pool of the season, which does lend itself for many large pulls. You have, of course, other slight benefits of being a Warlock. You can give out Hellstones to your party. You still have very heavy defensive power as a Warlock yourself. You are a spec providing players with combat rest, not that it's needed in this season given the popularity of Resto Druid, but still, it's an extra. So that is what has given Destruction Warlock this power in this season, their uncapped AoE DPS. And this comes, of course, to create a problem, because right now, in the meta, besides Destruction, you have Augmentation as well as Shadow Priest, but also Red Paladin, which were popular. So if Destro is growing up to demand a spot in the meta, who is bound to lose out eventually is going to be Fire Mage. That's because if you have these mega large pools, then what you want to have is to buff the spec that can hit all of these targets at once, which means an Augmentation Evoker to buff the Destruction Warlock and a Shadow Priest to buff the Destruction Warlock. There is no point in bringing a Red Paladin if the Destro Warlock can hit 25 targets and the Red Paladin can hit 8 of them. Just bring a Destro, get him buffed up, and do the big large AoE pulls. And that is what will likely happen, as Fire Mage will slightly continue to go down and Destruction will slightly continue to go up. Even if we look at the currently popular composition, we will likely start seeing more and more Destruction becoming popular. I mean, it already is, right? We already see more and more Destruction Warlocks being paired with augmentation and shadow, but it's likely what will be the main choice of groups high up in key level. Shadow, augmentation, and then destruction or fire mage seem to be how things will shape up in Mythic Plus. But for today, we weren't talking about the Mythic Plus meta as a whole, we were just shining a light as to why and how has Destruction Warlock risen so much and so quickly at the beginning of this season in their power. So that's how things will likely continue to develop in Mythic Plus. We will see, of course, in the next couple of weeks or so how things will shape up in the season. But for today, on this Saturday, this was all on the informational video about the rise of Destruction Warlock. So we are now leaving each other on this weekend, starting by, of course, thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can, as usual, still be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I love it. I love it having to record videos with 3-minute stops in between segments because of the house renovations going down next door.